Hi, I'm Lucy Meacott. Welcome to Eye in the Sky as we continue our airborne journey across northern England. So let's take a look at the map for today. We'll leave Manchester heading south and take in some magnificent local sites like Lyme Hall and Lyme Park and the fascinating industrial suburb of Style before making for Macclesfield and the Peak District. We then turn north and head up to Buxton in Derbyshire, following that with the high peaks, including the Pennine Way and Kinderscout, where we reach the end of today's journey. So, as you can see, there's lots to fit in. Once again, we're in the expert hands of our pilot, BJ. You ready?
Yep, we're ready to rock, Lucy.
Okay, let's get flying.
Zero 3, sir.
We start today with a quick look over Manchester. Just a reminder while we all get our bearings. Down there is Salford Quays, a place which only a few years back was a run-down area, and today is one of the shining examples of urban regeneration in the country. We're not hanging around the city, but aiming towards the country. Heading south from the centre of Manchester by air is easier said than done, as airspace is at a premium with Manchester Airport nearby. We have to wait for incoming jets to land so that we don't get too close. In fact, it has to be a quick look only, as air traffic control wants us out of the area before the next jet lines up on its final approach. It can get pretty scary buzzing about up here with all these large aircraft around. It is tightly controlled and we are kept well out of the way. But I'll be pleased when we're heading out into the countryside and we can concentrate on the views. Meanwhile, we're just outside Manchester at Stockport. It was a small place until the Industrial Revolution, when it expanded rapidly. The German philosopher Engels wrote in 1844 that the town was renowned as one of the duskiest, smokiest holes in the whole of the industrial area. A far cry from today's town, which has a population of nearly 300,000. In the 17th century, it was renowned for making hats and as a centre for the spinning of silk. If you needed a silk top hat, Stockport was the place to come. Not far from the centre of Stockport is Bramwell Hall, one of the great black and white timber houses of Cheshire. We'll see quite a few of these during the next half hour. They're typical of Cheshire and mainly found in this part of the country. The black lines are the oak structure of the house, all held together by wooden pegs. The white infilling used to be made of twigs plastered with clay, but in many old houses this has been replaced with more durable materials. It's amazing that a house made of wood has survived for 600 years, though it takes a bit of looking after. House and park now belong to the local authority and offer a place to visit for schools, as well as an open space to take in some fresh air. Actors are often employed to take children back in time, and the children themselves are encouraged to wear Tudor dress to get a feel for the period. To the east of Stockport is a house that's often been seen as a location on television and in films. Who can forget Colin Firth as Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice, taking a dip in the lake at his house, called Pemberley in the novel, and leaving Miss Elizabeth Bennet a little flustered. It's actually called Lyme Hall, and there's been a house on this land for centuries. Though it didn't take on its present appearance until 1720, when an Italian architect transformed it into an Italianate palazzo. The house is a most impressive sight, as it was meant to be. If you had money in those days, you didn't hide it. Lyme Hall was in the Lee family for many centuries, the land originally being granted by King Richard II to Piers Lee for heroic deeds in battle. The house is surrounded by a 1,400-acre deer park, which had been a hunting forest. It costs a fortune to keep up a house like this, and when the house was inherited by the latest member of the Lee family during the war in 1942, the new owner immediately handed the whole estate over to the National Trust, so it could be opened up for everyone to enjoy, forever. Perched on top of a hill in the deer park is this tower, the Cage. It was built as a banqueting house in 1737 so that guests could enjoy views of the hunt from their elevated viewpoint, and then no doubt have a jolly good lunch afterwards.
A building like Lyme Hall gives us a window into the past and allows us to see how privileged people lived their lives hundreds of years ago. And just a few miles from here, there's another great estate that's become an open space for local people to enjoy. But to get there, we have to cross the flight path into Manchester Airport, so fingers crossed they'll let us do it.
In 2005, the airport handled 22 million passengers. It ranks third in the country after Heathrow and Gatwick, and 48th in the world. With a new runway, the airport can now handle big jets. The first passenger terminal opened back in 1952. During World War II, it was much smaller than it is now, and was a Royal Air Force station called RAF Ringway. With air traffic control permission, we've been cleared to take a quick look at Tatton Hall and Park, which is almost at the end of the runway. We've been asked to keep low out of the way of aircraft taking off, so it's down over the lake towards the house. The great glory of Tatton is its garden, which surrounds the late 18th century house. It's one of the largest gardens in the north of England and has just about everything in it, from an Italian and Japanese garden to a fernery, orangery and tower garden. In all, it extends to over 1,000 acres, with both red and fallow deer in the park. It's run by Cheshire County Council. Much of the wealth that went to build houses like Lyme Park and Tatton Park came from local industries and the new mills springing up all over the northwest. Not all mill owners were grasping tyrants. Some looked after their workers really well. They usually built handsome houses for themselves, however, and often right next door to their mill so they could keep an eye on the workforce. At Stile, there's a superb example of a working mill along with the original village built for the workforce. Quarrybank is one of the best preserved mills from the whole of the Industrial Revolution, built in 1784. It's hard to believe today, but 50 years later, this was the largest factory of its type in the country, and that meant the world. Here they spun and wove cotton, and today this working mill still produces calico. As it was built before the great age of steam, power comes from the river to drive a water wheel. Through a system of shafts and belts, that wheel in turn drives the looms and other machinery. When the mill opened in 1784, the owner, Samuel Gregg, needed lots of workers, so he housed them close by in a new factory village, Stile. It's the least altered and perhaps the best preserved industrial village of its type, now in the hands of the National Trust. He also built a school with separate entrances for boys and girls. But by the standards of the time, the children were well looked after and also provided a ready supply of new hands to work in the mill.
Our next stop is Alderley Edge, home to several talented footballers. But now we're at the halfway point of our journey and it's a good place for a break. Be sure to join us in part 2 though, when we're off to explore some of the most beautiful landscape in the country. Don't go away. Welcome back. Well, in a moment we're off to the Peak District. But before that, here's a question for you. Where is one of the most popular places to live if you're very rich or maybe a top professional footballer?
The answer is Alderley Edge, named after the wooded escarpment high above the Cheshire Plain. The affluent village of Alderley Edge is home to many Premiership footballers and members of what's become known as the Cheshire Set. This place claims to have more millionaires per square mile than anywhere else in the country. It also holds the title of the Cheshire village where most champagne is consumed. Just a quick look at some of these luxury mansions and you can believe it. I'd hate to think how much a house costs around here. I don't think money could buy this one. It has one of the most interesting histories of any house in the country and has remained in the hands of the Lee family since 1315. That's nearly 700 years. There was a house here even before that. It was a Saxon manor. The place has been built and rebuilt many times during its long history. As you can see in the courtyard, parts are black and white Cheshire style. The main front with pillars is Georgian, and there's everything in between. As a matter of passing interest, the family emblem is a unicorn. Handel, the great composer, is known to have stayed here and played the organ, which still exists and is in working order. At least here in Macclesfield, you don't have all that parkland to keep in order. Like Stockport, this is a town once famous for its silk textile industry. It was even nicknamed Silk Town. It was at one time the largest producer of finished silk products in the world. No longer just a manufacturing centre, Macclesfield ranks among the top 30 most wealthy towns in Britain. Macclesfield does have one more claim to fame. It's the birthplace of Hovis bread. This is the mill where it all started back in 1898. It was built on the Macclesfield Canal so that raw materials could be brought in and new bread delivered to neighbouring towns. Though I'm not sure how fresh it would have been by the time it arrived, barges moving rather slowly. By 1904, the bread was so popular that a large new factory was built at Trafford Park in Manchester. If you're looking for a house that has everything and a good story to go with it, try Gawsworth Hall. It's a typical timber-framed black and white Cheshire mansion, Tudor in origin, with many later alterations, and is full of quirky interest. Gawsworth was also the home of Mary Fitton, who came from a family known as the Fighting Fittons, which helps to explain some of what follows. She's believed by many to be the Dark Lady of Shakespeare's sonnets. She was a precocious young woman, appointed Maid of Honour to Queen Elizabeth I, and then banished from court after becoming pregnant by the Earl of Pembroke. Her nickname was the Wayward Maid of Gawsworth. We're about to enter the Peak District, approaching the park from the southwest over a fantastic escarpment known as the Roaches. The rocks seem to stand guard over the landscape and have been worn into fantastic shapes by the elements. In 1980, the whole area was bought by the National Park to save it and guarantee public access. To the south of the Roaches is a solitary edge, rising steeply from the ground. Built into the lower tier is Rock Cottage, a tiny primitive house which was once a gamekeeper's residence. This is also a great place for climbers, as we can see.
The Peak District was the first national park in the country, formed in 1951. It covers an area of roughly 555 square miles, and it's very popular with tourists. The first guide to this area was written way back in 1636, but it's not much use to us today because it was written in Latin.
The largest town in the Peak District is Buxton, and overlooking it is Solomon's Temple. It was built by a local publican, Solomon Mycock, in 1896. It's said he built it to provide work for local people in times when jobs were few. It can't have taken long to put up, as it's only 20 foot high, but it was a nice thought. There's a viewing platform at the top. Buxton is renowned as a spa town that still produces the famous natural water. The spring had long been known when the Romans came across it. Later in the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church took control of the healing waters, building a monastery on the site. The spring was reputed to be a remedy for all kinds of diseases and continued to attract visitors. In the 18th century, an elegant crescent was built to accommodate the growing numbers of the fashionable set who came to take the waters. One of Buxton's claims to fame is the roof of the old Royal Devonshire Hospital, which was the largest unsupported dome structure in Europe for many years. The building is now part of the University of Derby. Perhaps Buxton is now best known for its music festival, some of which takes place in the charming Opera House, which also hosts an annual Gilbert and Sullivan season. Buxton is in the Peak District National Park, and we're heading a bit north to the High Peak area, where we join one of the most successful walking trails in the British Isles, the Pennine Way. It's England's most famous long-distance footpath. It was officially opened in April 1965 after years of negotiation with numerous landowners along it. The route runs for about 270 miles from Edale near Chapel on Frith all the way up to the Scottish border. The views really are worth the effort. Not that I've had to expend much energy to get up here. The path stands out on the hills as some of it is paved with stone slabs. This team are hard at work on essential repairs. The sheer number of feet that trek up here each year can cause great damage. Those that love nature the most can do our environment the most harm, but not if proper care is taken. We're now among the high peaks where we find some of the most exhilarating landscape in the whole national park. It hasn't always been everyone's cup of tea. The author Daniel Defoe, visiting here in 1725, describes some of this countryside as a waste and howling wilderness. It was pretty deserted in those days, but he did visit in winter when the snow lay thick. This is Kinder Scout and the highest part of the Peak District. It's a windswept gritstone plateau standing about 600 metres above sea level. To the west is Kinder Downfall, where the Kinder River literally flows off the plateau from the peat-soaked bog that sits on the top. Even in dry weather, it's still very boggy on top, and walkers have to be careful to stick to the paths, otherwise they could sink into the soft earth and get into serious trouble. Kinder Scout is also a very historic place, because in 1932 it was the scene of a mass trespass, where 5 young men were imprisoned for asserting their right to roam across the moors as our ancestors once did. Their efforts were worthwhile. The UK, through its parks, the National Trust and local authorities, offers access to as much public and sometimes private land as any country in the world. So make the most of it.
And that's it for this week's Eye in the Sky. Once again, thanks to BJ for showing us some fantastic sights today.
It's been lovely, hasn't it?
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. And be sure to join us next time when we continue showing you the beautiful northwest of England. Bye-bye for now.